Welcome to episode 1 of Cyclops is Waiting for Me, an Xmen, the animated series weekly recap podcast. I'm JC from Whiskey and Waffles.
And I'm Rod Kim. You can find me on Spotify, I guess. Good place to look.
Spotify's a solid spot to look, yeah.
Cyclops is Waiting for Me is our weekly podcast series where we are going back and watching every single episode of the original 1992 Xmen, the animated series in their original intended script order, building up to the release of Xmen 97 coming to Disney Plus in 2023.
So we are a recap show about a series that came out 30 years ago. There will be spoilers. And if you don't want it spoiled for you, make sure to pause the podcast, watch the episode, and then come back. And we're going to do our best to avoid mentioning anything about future episodes that we haven't covered yet. By the way, just for transparency, we are not currently sponsored by or affiliated in any way with Disney or Disney Plus. But if they want to pay us in the future, we would totally be okay with that.
Don't forget to follow us on social media at Cyclops IWFM Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And of course, make sure to follow us on all your favorite podcast services. And finally, we record these episodes in batches right now. So if we're reacting to any news about the upcoming series, we may be behind by a few weeks.
Speaking of news, I saw today, to not totally date us on this one, the original voice actor for Logan was in the recording studio. Nerdist reported on that. So glad to see that he's back in the series.
That's amazing. It's like this slow trickle of like finding out who's coming back. I don't want to give too much away. We might have some more news about that in the upcoming episodes. Maybe we'll be breaking one of these things.
We'll break it, and then the episode won't come out for 4 weeks after we break it. It'll be perfect. Awesome. Yeah. So on to the actual show. Today, we're going to be talking about episodes 1 and 2, Night of the Sentinels. So the part that I thought was really interesting was when they launched the show, they went in with the intent of the first episode being a two-parter. By the way, we're going to constantly reference Eric Lewald's book. It's called Previously on Xmen, the Making of an Animated Series. Great source of information for this. And of course, if we talk about anything that we found on any other websites, videos, etc., we'll shout those people out appropriately. Not going to take credit for anybody else's work. They decided that was something that they wanted to do with this series, was to go big with it. And they made some really cool decisions in that first episode. And, you know, we're going to pepper in different things about the series throughout various episodes of this podcast. So, Rob, what do you think? Let's hop in and talk about what happened in the episode and see where the conversation takes us.
The first thing I noticed, because we came in hot, was that theme song. And I know I'm a little impartial to it.
Yeah. Transparently, you're very impartial to it.
I did a collab with...
you're very partial to it.
Yeah. Did a collab with composer Ron Wasserman. But also, like, I think everyone can pretty much universally agree. It's like, fucking... Are we allowed to curse on this?
Yeah, sure, fuck it.
Epic.
We are now. Congratulations. Yeah. We are officially a mature rated podcast right now.
Here. Yep. It's such an epic theme song. And we made a comment before. It's one you just don't skip. Just sets the tone for everything. So I think that's the first thing that really stuck out to me. But also like the 90s styling, the words Xmen flying behind the characters as they're running and stuff.
Yeah. And I also loved in that animated sequence, each of the characters, they had to create the name logo for each of them. They were not allowed to use ones that already existed within the Marvel comics. So those treatments were all original to the show itself.
I didn't know that, but that makes so much sense. Y'all, like, intellectual property laws are weird. I think it's something we're going to learn more and more of as the series goes on.
I mean, we're just stealing everything and making a podcast about somebody else's property at this point. So, yeah.
And we'll also see how this turns out. But as of recording, we don't have like an intro stinger theme song.
We don't even have artwork as of recording.
Oh, nice. But I'm supposed to be writing something because of publishing laws. We can't use like the original recordings. I'm supposed to be writing the theme for this podcast with Ron Wasserman, which is insane. Hopefully we do justice.
So let's get into the episode itself. It starts with a shot of Sabretooth, who at the time is unnamed. The thing that stood out to me the most is Sabretooth chucks a car towards the camera itself. I know Sabretooth is a strong character. I've never seen Sabretooth throw a car into the air. Like, that had to be from the perspective of a news helicopter or something like that, because he throws that like 5 stories high in the air. It's pretty absurd.
I noticed like different characters' powers and strengths and stuff were kind of fluid throughout the show.
Yeah.
Because I also noticed, how many abs does Sabretooth have? I noticed that in one of the shots, it's not just the 6-pack. I think he has like a case.
He
like
might.
a pallet. Like you count down, it's like, it looks like he's diseased. So maybe all that ab powers would help him like throw that car.
Maybe. I'm pretty sure abs are not what helps you throw stuff into the sky, but you and I don't work out much. So we might be totally wrong. From there, we cut over to Jubilee's house where her adopted parents reference the agency.
I think it's her foster parents.
They are, it's foster
I think
parents.
Mentioned later, this is the foster kid. Later, I realized like how interesting it was for the 90s to have a Chinese American girl who's a foster kid and who's a mutant. They were just like, we're just not going to hold anything getting back. And she kind of becomes our eyes, right? Like our experience.
For definitely the first episodes,
Series, yeah. Which usually I kind of wince at a little bit if it's not done well, but they did so well in this. Like, I feel like I was learning everything with her, because even though presumably a lot of us were somewhat familiar with the X-Men by then, it kind of introduced us to like what this version would be like, you know?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting as well to have it be that combination of things that I realized 30 years later that I never would have back then. But you have somebody who is in an adopted family. She's only been there for 1 year with this family. So that gives me the impression that she either had a recent tragedy or she's one of those kids who was going from foster home to foster home. And she's in that rebellious era. Like, she's literally sneaking out of her house, out the window, because she hears that her parents have registered her with the agency. One thing that I thought was really funny is I would pause as I was watching the scene, and I'm now in that Easter egg phase, and I'm looking at the posters in her room and stuff. And there's one poster that has a big X, and I don't know what band that's supposed to be a part of, but that was one of them. The one that creeped me out the most is it looks like there is a combination of the devil Ned Flanders as well as the skiing Ned Flanders right when you are looking at the door to her room. And I rewound it like 3 or 4 times to go back there, and it was super trippy. It is 100% inspired by Flanders.
I'm gonna have to go back and find that now. It's especially interesting because that was like, you know, in the middle of the Fox's like heyday.
Yeah,
so that would make sense.
This was the second big animated hit for Fox, so they were literally only basing it off the fact that The Simpsons had existed, if that was intentional. Otherwise, that was just, you know, one of the artists, because these were coming from an overseas art house, Korean, I believe. I could be wrong on that one.
A lot of animation was done in Korean studios at that time. That would be interesting to find out if it was like the same animation house in Korea or similar ones, you know, like
we'll look it up and we'll put it on Instagram.
Right. Yeah, that would be interesting. Like, if even if it wasn't meant to be an Easter egg, if one of the animators had no idea what was going on, they're like, we need something on that poster, like use that one, and they just point over across the room. They're like, it's Ned.
So after Jubilee leaves her house, you see the first image of the Sentinel, and it is looking for Jubilee, and the dog is barking at it and stuff. But Jubilee is not there. Jubilee has made her way to the mall,
which is such a 90s.
It is the most 90s thing,
and she escaped the arcade, which I think almost every kid could identify with at that time. Because if you're going to sneak
at that
out,
time,
at that time, I don't even know if kids these days know what arcades are. That's not Dave and Buster's.
I was going to say, there's Dave and Buster's. We used to go to arcades that did not have alcohol in them.
Right, or sports. It was literally like Primal Rage, Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and a bunch of pinball games, you know?
Yeah. And then we get one of our very obviously 90s moments, even more so than the fact that it's in the mall, where there are VCRs being shown on the screen.
As a teen, well, not even teenager, like a preteen, like arcades were kind of therapy, because you go there, your friends might be there, and you could work out like frustrations in the machine. It was like 25 cents a pop, depending on the game and stuff. I wonder, for someone who didn't know what mutants or X-Men were at the time, if they were wondering like, oh, is this agency or blah, 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 kind of hinting at her being like Chinese American or a girl or something like that. I know there's obviously the superhero things. You saw the intro by then, but she talks about, you know, not being understood and stuff. And at that point, you don't see her powers yet. And this giant Sentinel, which, you know, that's something I hated all the X-Men movies, but one of the things I definitely missed on all that stuff was like the presence of the Sentinels. And I know they kind of appeared later on, but not really.
I think it was Days of Future Past where you saw the remnant of the head or something like that. Yeah.
But like in this series, they established right at the beginning, like these are going to be the goons, you know, of this universe.
They were going to be one of your primary antagonists. Yeah.
But I love that presence of the Sentinel. It's such a cool thing. I made a note here too. I don't know if this was like it was an accidental reference. It had to have been, because it wasn't even a reference. But I love how the Sentinels take on Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, like movies method of like hiding. They're like, just stand and don't move, and they won't notice. Because there's scenes where they're like 4 stories tall, and then Jubilee or anybody will just walk right past them and not notice them. They're the size of the building, and that's obviously like a humanoid figure.
Well, the thing that I noted, and it happens later in the episode, actually, the rule in comic books is nobody ever sees Spider-Man swinging above them or Superman flying above them, because nobody looks up. And and I think that legitimately goes back to like the rules of like being a ninja and stuff like that, where people would hide in corners of rooms up high, because most people, their eye line is never looking directly up. Granted, you're missing the giant legs that are next to you. But from there, we start to see the crossover and we see Storm and Rogue in normal clothes, which I thought was cool. And they were exiting an Elizabeth's Secret, which obviously was a thinly veiled Victoria's Secrets reference that, again, as a kid, never would have picked that one up. And we also see Gambit, who is coming on to a woman that works in a store that apparently only sells playing cards, which I don't know how that survives in a mall, but that kind of like lends itself to the fact that malls are wastelands now because you would have stuff like a playing card store. But Gambit is in full gear. And I thought that was really interesting that, at least as far as I can remember for the first few episodes and what we watched in prep for this recording, you don't ever see Gambit out of it aside from a bathing suit in one of the episodes.
I actually made a note about that too, because there's a line at some point in the episode where they're like, how do they know I'm a mutant? It's like, well, probably from the way you're dressed, because all the X-Men are like in costume for the most part, except for this part with Storm and Rogue like shopping. Gambit's like in his full getup. I'm like, are you just in armor at the mall? Like,
like Storm and Rogue look like your average beautiful people, and Rogue has like a little bit of a punk vibe because she has the multicolor hair and stuff. But there's nothing that indicates that they are not regular Homo sapiens. And then we get the attack that happens, and that's when you see Storm and Rogue pop up and you actually see them using their powers, and you start to understand what the mutant aspect of them is if you're unfamiliar with the concept going into the show. What I thought was really interesting is when the Sentinel scans Storm and Rogue, it says unidentified mutants and basically is instructed to ignore them. In the continuation of that fight, Gambit gets scanned and all of a sudden it switches for him being expendable. Still an unidentified mutant, but he is expendable.
At first I was confused because like, how did they identify Jubilee and not them? Then I realized, it's the Mutant Registration Act.
Right.
But then I was like, why ignore any mutant? The whole point of this whole thing is that they're dangerous, right? So just be like, oh, well, no, they're fine.
Right.
This one's flying and shooting lightning at me.
Well, and my read on that was because at this point, the agency has only revealed itself as going after a registered mutant.
Yeah.
I'm interpreting it as they were not seen as dangerous enough for Rogue and for Storm that it couldn't take care of them and just get them out of the way.
Yeah.
And then as another mutant was added to the scenario, that's when Gambit all of a sudden turned to expendable instead of ignoring him.
Yeah. They're like, oh, we have too many in one place.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, and this is just like, comic book TV logic. If the Sentinels were part of like a government program, like how hard would it be for like the people in charge of that program to like justify the mall being completely destroyed, like the entire front entrance and everything, just like, oh, we got 3 of them.
Right. But I think that's the interesting part in the episode is for parts 1 and 2, of course, is the agency is not officially U.S. government. They are a subcontracted agency. So when we get to a later instance and as we continue on with our recap, they're going to have to explain it to somebody, but it's not the same as the FBI or CIA being the ones to go in there and do it themselves.
Yeah, they're asking for forgiveness and not permission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Jubilee jumps out to try to help Gambit. When the attention gets diverted back to her, she runs outside, and that's where we see Cyclops in his full, not subtle gear. The dude is literally like a neon light. And you get the real vibe for the first time how strong one of these mutants can be, because Cyclops does a one-shot kill on the Sentinel. It's literally one optic blast, and that's it.
This is a good point to mention. All these introductions are like so good for having so many characters right off the bat. As soon as you see Cyclops there, you're like, oh, he's a Boy Scout.
Oh, he's in full tactical gear.
So like he's there on a mission, but also he wants everyone to know like he's in charge.
Yeah.
And then even with Storm and Rogue, Storm's first dialogue was like so like stoic and regal and stuff. It was a great introduction. Like, oh crap, that's Cyclops.
I also appreciated that 5 characters that we've met so far have all been staggered. The only exception being Rogue and Storm at the same time, but everybody got moments instead of all of a sudden just getting everyone thrown at you the same time. And I think they wanted this show to be more sophisticated. And that was one of the things that Eric said in his book is they wanted something that kids could watch, but that would also still appeal to the adults who had been fans of the X-Men since the introductions, in the 60s or even the the giant-sized X-Men rebirth of the series, you know.
That's really forward thinking on their part. A lot of people on the team, you quote them now, between the Leewalds and Ron Wasserman and stuff, everyone came to the approach of like, don't talk down or don't write down or whatever. That it really works. We're still talking about 30 years later.
From there, Jubilee regains her consciousness at the unknown location, and she sees Beast, who obviously is just this really disconcerting image. And he actually says disconcerting yet provocative, which is just so appropriate for that character.
Yeah.
Because this is the 90s version of Beast. This is the one where he had the extreme like points on his hair, and he was very, very animalistic and most resembling a blue ape. He would later in the comics like start to take a cat-like appearance and stuff like that. But this is like, he can't pass in human society.
Yeah. He's like a gorilla.
Yeah, exactly. Literally, he's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And then you also see Morph, and you see what his power is. I thought it was really, really interesting that he's making fun of Senator Kelly, and he goes, "My fellow Americans, I am an idiot." And it's one of those things where a kid at the time was not going to get the reference to Richard Nixon.
Me and my younger brother, would quote that to each other all the time without knowing at all what it meant. And I don't know why it stuck.
Yeah.
It was just the way the voice actors said it or something. But I didn't know that at the time. And actually, as a kid, I thought that he was making fun of the president. And then later I was like, oh, wow, this is so much more nuanced.
Yep. And then we see also one of the little like joke Easter eggs they made it in. They had Calvin Clone on TV.
Yes.
Yep. I thought that was funny. Jubilee keeps following her journey through the location, and they start showing various mutants on the monitor screens. You have Domino, you have Cannonball, and you have Magneto. And at the time, you don't know who any of those characters are.
Yeah.
And I believe we don't ever actually see Domino or Cannonball in the series. If we do, it's definitely not in the first season.
Yeah, and it's like a throwaway probably, because I didn't even notice that. I recognize Magneto.
Yeah, Domino and Cannonball. Cannonball's the one where he's soaring through the sky.
Wow.
Yep.
World building.
And that's where we see Xavier and Jean for the first time. And you definitely get very much the vibe of like leadership, and these are your tacticians outside of the battlefield. Whereas the Boy Scout from Cyclops definitely felt like the guy on the ground. He's the one that has to make the hard decisions.
Which is funny because I guess it's setting up the surprise for Jean like down the road, because at this point we're like, oh, she's the thinker. She's, like you said, like the planner and tactician.
Right. From there, we get a Danger Room sequence where we see Gambit again, and he's fighting with Wolverine. I appreciated there was a reference to Wolverine's pride in that scene, because if anybody knows about the events that led up to the show, there was originally Australian accented Wolverine in a pilot called Pride of the X-Men. Also had Kitty Pryde in it as well. But I thought it was funny that it was like, oh, Wolverine's pride. Was that intentional? Or?
Oh, I didn't think about that.
I mean, I could be looking way too far into it.
We could talk about that other show some other time, maybe the bonus thing or something. That was such an awful pilot.
I've still never watched it at this point. So then we see for the first time a shot of the mansion, and you see that it's Professor X's school for the gifted. I always thought that was interesting because later in the comics, it would be changed to School for Extraordinary Youngsters. Mm-hmm. And I just thought it was really, really interesting that gifted was the choice of phrasing that they were using for the outside world.
Yeah, I think in that conversation with Professor X and Jean, they talk about how like, oh, I didn't expect to like come out like this, but here we are.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows you that they've been kind of preparing and hiding for, we don't really know how long.
No, we don't have any indication of how long. And we get through the eyes of Jubilee, understanding what the purpose of the X-Men are from Storm. And I thought that was a really, really great scene because she hates everything about herself that is a mutant, whereas Storm, we don't know what her history is yet, is so proud of the fact that she is a mutant. And I think that's one of those things that accepting yourself ends up becoming such a big theme to this show. So many times throughout the course of the show, people are just coming to terms with the fact that they are a mutant.
You can't change it.
No, you can't change it, but some people are going to try to change it.
Yeah. In that talk between Jubilee and Storm, this is one of like the first instances, I'm going to see like how many more times this happens, where Storm has this zinger, but I think it's unintentional. I think it's only like funny in hindsight.
Which one was it?
So Jubilee's like, so this is a place for weirdos like me. And then Storm, deadpan, is like all of us. I was like, what?
I think that was unintentional.
Little foreshadowing. We're going to talk about this more.
And then we get a jump over and we find out the full name of the agency is the Mutant Control Agency. They are a private company. Gyrick is our lead antagonist there. One of the things that Eric Lewald talks about in his book is the fact that they made sure that it was not the government directly, but a third-party agency because of Fox's rules about not wanting to look like they were going against the U.S. government. And that was, you know, you could have individuals who were not good, but they didn't want to go head-to-head because I'm sure standards and practices would cause issues. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, they gotta get that sponsorship money.
Yep. And then following that, we see the scene you were referring to earlier, actually, of the Sentinel that's basically hiding in plain sight, standing up against a building. And it really goes to the whole, like, don't look up. That's all that it is.
I appreciate, though, that they tried to signal something to us as kids as his eyes lit up once she walked past. They're like, okay, maybe it was just dark enough.
Right.
But still, it's a giant robot.
Yeah, there's no way that she didn't see that. But we have to suspend disbelief because end of the day, this is a cartoon that was targeted to 10-year-olds as their main audience.
Yeah.
There is definitely a little bit of suspension of disbelief. Then we pop over and we see that they're going to send a team to the Mutant Control Agency to try to eliminate the registration of all the mutants that have already been put in the system and such. And we actually see the start of two conflicts that happen. We see one with Cyclops and Xavier, where it is a conflict of ideology between the two about how to handle this, revealing themselves to the public and things like that. And we also see Cyclops and Wolverine have a butting of heads. And I believe it was because Wolverine wanted to go after Jubilee and Cyclops said, we need to take care of the registration first and foremost.
One of many conflicts between Wolverine and Cyclops to go.
Very much so.
It's an important thing to say. Professor X decided to go to the Mutant Control Agency because he recognized that the photo the Sentinel had in file was the one from the Registration Act, that signal. So it wasn't just he was like, oh, today's the day to choose violence.
Yep. We get to it. The mutant power is really being showcased in a strong manner. You see Morph, who is able to make his face look like the security guard. The thing that is interesting is he does not change his voice, and the theory behind that is even though Morph can change his voice, he had not heard that security guard talk yet. So if you haven't heard him talk, how is he going to replicate the voice?
Interesting details that they follow, because as a, not 10-year-old anymore, I was like, how is he changing the clothes? Then the voice thing's an interesting detail.
Yep.
I also, while they were walking through like the woods and stuff, Rogue is explaining like her backstory. Even like years later, I was like, wow, that was like good weaving in of exposition without just seeming like random monologue. Yep. She's talking about like her first boyfriend, and I feel like that's something you would talk about when you're walking through the woods for like however many hours and stuff, Yeah,
and that's one thing that this show continues to do is they like to plant a seed and then pay it off multiple episodes later to come back and reference. This scene, you also see Storm uses her fog because Wolverine can smell the ozone of the laser light traps.
Yeah, and you see a little bit of Beast's character. He's like, you can sense the infrared spectrum. And it's interesting that they're all learning about each other as well.
Yeah, the first episode ends with one of your favorite quotes.
You look as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. That's another quote that me and my brother, like, it just stuck with us for years, but we know exactly what it meant. And then they ended on this like cliffhanger. And I don't know as a kid if I had seen that in a cartoon show.
Especially not a first episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I've definitely remembered like season finales, or I believe at that point we may have already had the Who Shot Mr. Burns moment.
Oh, yeah.
But it was never the first episode, which I think was just their way of getting us a full 44 minutes of TV to lock us in instead of the standard, you only got 22 minutes, so you have to force everything in there. So that jumps right into part 2. And the thing that stood out to me is the outfits of the guards for the Mutant Control Agency looked like a red version of AIM. And for those that don't know, are the beekeepers is what they're affectionately like joked as within the Marvel universe. But they look like red AIM soldiers and scientists to me.
So, what's interesting about that? I wonder if there's actually this kind of attaches to it, because it's a weird detail that I shouldn't have remembered, but I thought I remembered the guards looking different. Then I looked it up later, and they did change them after the original airing because of some color matching issues. So I wonder if there was an intention, like you said, for originally, and then they were like, nope, and then they could only afford to color swap it later or something.
Maybe. Yeah.
This may be the only episode that didn't have a previously on Xmen.
Right, and I think that literally came from the fact that the original airing... Mm-hmm. Because you had to include your previously on in your 22 minutes of airtime. Mm-hmm. So your previously on would have taken up at least 30 seconds or more. Mm-hmm. in your original broadcast was like literally episode 1 ended, episode 2 started.
Oh, so I can't remember if I watched it in the original airing, but I think they did do a recap though, right?
They might have.
It was a short one, but I just remember missing the previously on X-Men.
So they're breaking into the base, and then you get another very 90s moment where they have to destroy the hard files, which are literally like printed folders of paper
cabinets,
and the drives. And the way that they're destroying the drives is literally just destroying a single computer monitor.
Yeah, it's like right before that era of like this USB stick or it was a 3.5-inch floppy will destroy the world.
We literally didn't have internet connections at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, the government probably did, but the average person was so unaware of that kind of stuff that if they put it, they would have had to over explain how the information's being shared.
And I love that Storm, like Beast is like trying to hack it.
Yeah.
And Storm is like, we ain't got time for this.
Boom.
Which is like a little bit of like same energy as T'Challa in the MCU later. He's like, I don't care, for his introduction.
Yep. And then we get a little bit of a glimpse over to Gyrick, who has Jubilee captured. And they say that the first run of Sentinels is going to be 100 strong. I thought that was interesting. That was how few mutants or how strong they felt the Sentinels were, that they only needed 100. And then you get Trask, who is Bolivar Trask, who will continue to play a big part in the series throughout. I spent a few minutes looking it up. You see right before Storm destroys the monitor, a bunch of names of people on the screen. And I was like, oh, are these Easter eggs and stuff like that? This was a point. I don't know who those people were. They were not Marvel references or character references in any way. There was like Michael Booton, so Booton, and I found some of these names on IMDb, but they had nothing to do with the show. I think one of them, Jerry Bryan, was somebody who was in editorial for the Silver Surfer series, but that wouldn't come until years later.
Yeah. So maybe they were just like friends of people
random names or friends and stuff like that. There's a great reference to the Tin Woodsman, which is sending them back to Oz. I thought that was a great reference. Again, literally as a kid, never gonna hear or find those. And then we get the big moment of these two episodes where Wolverine gets taken out, and as that is happening, we see Morph going to his rescue, and you know that something big has happened because you don't see the shot connecting with him from the Sentinel, and it cuts to Jean and the Professor back at the mansion, and the phrase, "I don't sense anything," happens. To anything I could find, that was the first time I remembered a show I had watched outside of the Transformers movie where a character was killed, especially in the first episode on broadcast.
Yeah, how well the writers like understood both the universe and cinematic language, because it hit so much harder than just showing a character getting shot, but also, like you said, showing their reaction, like, I don't sense anything. It's like, oh, they really understand Jean and Xavier's like power set. It's showing it non-sequentially, because then like later on we do see kind of the events that happened and stuff, but what like a great moment of tension to just kind of like cut straight back to them back at the mansion. And I remember seeing Storm cry. It kind of got me. Like, they did a really good job of showing the trauma.
Yeah, you don't see the shot happen. You get Jean and Professor's reactions, and then you see the conflict taking place where they need to leave Morph and Beast behind because Beast got jacked up too. And then you start to see a replay of the fight. Cyclops had to call for the retreat. Everybody is just getting essentially decimated at that point. And that's where you get the ongoing conflict between Wolverine and Cyclops, because Wolverine is the one who says that the X-Men don't leave each other behind.
Yeah. I don't know if this is jumping too far ahead, but Rogue stopping Wolverine with their power set, it was like both a moment of like showing what her abilities were, because we got a little bit of a sense when she was telling the story, but I don't know if we actually saw it.
No, we hadn't seen it up to that point.
So to show her taking down someone as powerful as Wolverine, you know, we're seeing something in like kids media showing like a woman kind of overpowering a big burly guy that's supposed to be like this symbol of masculinity and like, you know.
Well, and I thought it was also really interesting because it shows that they are not the fully cohesive team at this point.
Yeah.
They're having infighting. They had to leave two of their members behind, one fatally behind for everything that they knew. And of course, that's going to cause a major rift in this team dynamic.
I'd never figured out, were we supposed to believe that this was like their first mission?
I believe it was supposed to be seen that this was their first public mission, like in one where they they knew there was no way that they could not be revealed to people who were going to be their antagonists.
So this is going to be the first kind of like declaration of war almost.
I wouldn't say declaration of war. I would say that this was we're here. This is like our new norm. Yeah. I don't think they ever wanted to be seen as being in an antagonistic relationship because they want to be the people who can work with humans, but they also had to say, we need to protect mutants.
Yeah.
From there, when Wolverine regains his consciousness and such, he swears that he's going to avenge Morph, and there's like a really poignant scene. And then we cut to see a woman president.
I noticed that too. I was like, wow.
Yeah, which, I mean, still to this day, we've not had, but they were definitely thinking in a progressive manner. There's the mention of the Federal Security Agency, which was, I guess, supposed to be their correlative to the FBI or CIA. There's mention of Robert Kelly.
They made a reference to New Salem as like an area or something, so I'm guessing it's kind of another reference to like Salem witch trials.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that one. Wolverine decides he needs to let off some steam, so he goes to a biker bar vibe, and the bar owner, I don't know if you picked up on this, has a tattoo on his arm and on his shirt has the same logo that will play a part later in, but at the time it just looks like a red bird image essentially.
Okay, I didn't notice that. I need to pay more attention to little details.
Yeah, I definitely was watching it with that critical eye for references and details. Cyclops goes to him. They have a little bit of a bar fight with the locals, and he says, basically, do you want to go save Jubilee? So Cyclops goes to Jubilee's home, is talking to the parents. The dad, still not fully grasping what the scenario is, called the registration agency. A Sentinel shows up to come after Cyclops, and then you get the very 90s not joke, which I thought was just...
Oh, yeah.
It was like one of those very much jokes at the time that Borat finally drove into the ground. It was already not cool, but just like, oh, it's really, really not cool now at this point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Not.
Cyclops injures the Sentinel, but purposely doesn't destroy it. And the whole thought is they're going to go and track it back to wherever they are. I thought it was still really, really interesting that they chose to use Detroit as the base of operations for the Sentinel manufacturing when this is supposed to be happening in New York.
Oh, yeah, because they make mention of like DC and stuff like that. I kind of assumed that the Detroit reference was maybe an homage or like reference to like the Detroit like race riots in the 60s and stuff, or I don't know if that was purposeful or not. Or...
I gathered it as a part of manufacturing and big warehouses and stuff, but it was still really interesting that you have stuff happening in Washington, DC. You have stuff around the school, which is New York, White Plains area, essentially. And then you have all the way in Detroit, which is not a close flight. Granted, they have a supersonic jet, but that Sentinel had to fly across multiple states, probably over portions of Canada to get there.
Yeah. No one knows because they don't look up.
No. Yeah.
I forget where they said in this episode, but I think Jubilee, somebody asked her something and she's like, does a mall baby eat chili fries? I was like, that's possibly one of the most like potent 90s phrases ever. I don't know if anybody born in this decade right now knows what that combination of words would mean together.
Yeah, no, 100%. We're bordering on boomer territory for knowing what it means, but no, you're 100% right. So we have a fight that takes place at the manufacturing facility. There's a lot of use of individual powers happening at this time, and the teamwork isn't there yet. There is no equivalent to the fastball special. There's not synergies between mutants and things like that. One of the things in the current New Mutants comic that's being published is they take combinations and they have code names for when two mutants are using their powers simultaneously, because you're getting a stronger result than if you did those individually.
Yeah, I was wondering too, now that you mentioned that they weren't cohesive, we saw in the Danger Room training stuff, they were like at each other, which makes sense because like if you're going to train, there's only so much you can do against like a wall and stuff. So now they're getting real world, figuring out like we can't just all like shoot our guns at them and try to figure it out,
Yeah, I love during the fight, we actually see how strong Rogue is because she gets hit from behind and literally makes a body-shaped dent in a metal floor.
Yeah.
And gets up. Like, no problem. She's good. They come out on top. Enough of the Sentinels get damaged that Gyrick and Trask get out of there. Cyclops really, really doubts some of the choices he makes, which is kind of something we're going to see from Cyclops a lot, is even though he is the star pupil, he is the leader, he does not trust his own judgment when it doesn't go the way that he originally intended. I thought that was really, really a great seed to have in this episode.
But it's interesting now being older, like kind of realizing part of the dichotomy between like Cyclops and Wolverine is Wolverine has like seen combat in his lifetime.
Yeah.
We're not sure if Cyclops has. He's kind of comes from like a place of privilege and stuff. Like he knows everything by the book, but
he hasn't gotten his hands dirty.
Yeah. And we're seeing that now. He's like, he has to make the tough calls, and now he has to like live with the emotional baggage of like those tough calls and stuff. And this is all in the matter of like a day or two.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, just from the night of the Sentinels, it
might just be one night.
It might be one night. It's a hell of a night. And they're going until 6 a.m. Luckily, you get the time change by going over west. Maybe that's why they did Detroit, to get an extra hour of nighttime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the end of the episode is the team they're still there, but they are not in a really heroic stance. And that, again, is the opposite of what we expected from cartoons in the 90s. You usually had the big feel-good, everybody wins moment. And it's like, no, this team has been broken already. And this is our first time seeing them. We've literally lost a character. And again, they had to fight to get that approved. And that was the thing that they were fighting the most is we need this to happen. It originally wasn't actually going to be Morph. It was originally going to be Thunderbird.
Yeah. And I'm guessing the optics of that wouldn't have been great because he's Native American, correct?
Yeah, I'd imagine there was definitely some decision that played into that of him being one of your non-white characters and then killing him off in the first episode. I think the interesting thing is Morph instantly became likable to the younger audience.
Yeah.
And I think as great a character as Thunderbird is in the comics, he doesn't appeal to a young audience. So I think it ended up working out in their favor that they went with this alternate version of Changeling, who's a minor character within the comics. And we've actually never even seen this version of Morph through the comics. If you look at all the versions of him that exist, the one that would exist in the Age of Apocalypse and, the Exiles and stuff, it is a very different Morph who was more based on this character than who Changeling was in the first place.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this was this way where you were as a kid, but in my area, Morph was also the hardest to find action figure.
Yeah.
So like everything about between the show and the toys and stuff, I don't know if we liked him because he was scarce and they took him away from us so early, or like, was this that great of a character because he's literally just kind of a blank slate for anybody.
Well, and he was the funny one. Like if you look at who the characters were, especially coming off of the first episode, Cyclops is a sad sack. Wolverine is angry, but also really sad in the first episode. We don't know enough about Rogue and Gambit, although I think probably even at the time we were worried that Gambit was a little bit of a scumbag.
Yeah, as I was watching it, I was like, I don't want to be too politically correct about it. I was like, would he get canceled now? But it does seem like most of the people he's trying to woo are like into it too. So
yeah,
it kind of
he doesn't come across as creepery, but he's definitely hitting on anything with a pulse. Yeah. So, and one thing that we're always going to include in our episodes are a random expert factoid. The one we were going to talk about in this first episode was the fact that they had to fight to get a character killed in the episode. And I think that's one of the things that stands out the most to me, even looking back on this 30 years later, is they killed a character who was a main part of the team canonically, even if we didn't have the full impression of how much of the team until we get into later episodes. And it showed that there were stakes. All of a sudden, in your first episode, if you're establishing that somebody could be killed, it means that anybody could be killed. And that's pretty damn different than where we were for Saturday morning cartoons back then.
I actually remember emotionally as a kid being invested in the series because of that early death. If I remember right, those first 2 episodes came out and then there was like months before the series came out.
Yeah, there were a few months in between because of delays with production.
Because I remember having the VHS of that. I think at the beginning it was just like we taped it because Fox would announce when they would re-air them.
Yep.
And then later I did either my parents bought it or I read enough books and Pizza Hut gave us a VHS tape.
Yep.
And just me and my friends, we rewatched those 2 episodes over and over. We're like, can you believe they killed this guy? Like, what's going to happen? It became like the talk of recess. Yeah, having that stakes in there, like, really good decision. Because even as like little kids, we sensed that means this is going to be an awesome show.
All right. Well, I think we covered a lot. I think there was a lot to cover, especially the fact that this was the introduction of so many characters. Rod, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Still trying to figure out like a sign-off catchphrase. So if anybody has any suggestion.
Yeah, that's a thing. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. If you have any thoughts, please make sure to drop them either into the comments of the YouTube video that this upload is going to be attached to, or the official Instagram post for this episode. We'll make sure it's really clear. Again, it is Cyclops IWFM Pod. POD on Instagram and Twitter and everything. And if you liked what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on the podcast episode of your choosing. Thanks so much for joining us on this journey, guys. We'll talk to you next week.
Yeah.